Heavy concealer couldn't mask the purple shadows blooming across Penelope's jawline. She thought her oversized sweaters and quiet demeanor made her invisible in the high-stakes corporate world of New York. She was wrong. Cassian Alden, the ruthless head of the city's most dangerous syndicate, noticed every flinch, every nervous adjustment of her collar. When she walked into his office with a fresh, undeniable bruise, Penelope had no idea that her abusive boyfriend's death warrant had just been signed. Morning light filtered through the cracked blinds of the cramped Queen's apartment, casting harsh, unforgiving lines across the bathroom mirror. Penelope Davies stood motionless before the glass, her trembling fingers gripping the edge of the porcelain sink. She was 26, with soft, generous curves that she had spent a lifetime trying to hide beneath layers of unremarkable clothing. To the world, she was just the quiet, plus-sized secretary who kept her head down, took impeccable notes, and never asked for a raise. To Butch Kennedy, she was a punching bag. Butch was still asleep in the next room, snoring heavily, the lingering stench of cheap bourbon and stale cigarettes permeating the thin walls. Penelope reached for her makeup bag, unzipping it with painstaking slowness, so the metallic sound wouldn't wake him. She pulled out a tube of MAC Studio Fix concealer, twisting the cap off with practiced efficiency. Her reflection stared back at her. Wide hazel eyes, filled with chronic exhaustion. Framed by unruly dark curls, she usually wrestled into a severe bun. But her eyes weren't what held her attention. It was the dark, mottled bruise painting the left side of her neck, disappearing below her collarbone. Butch had grabbed her the night before. His massive hand had clamped down on her throat, simply because she had bought the wrong brand of coffee at the bodega. He had leaned in, his foul breath hot against her face, whispering cruelties about her weight, telling her that no one else would ever want a fat, useless woman like her, and that she should be grateful he tolerated her existence. Tears pricked the corners of Penelope's eyes, but she blinked them away rapidly. Crying would ruin the makeup, and she didn't have time to start over. She meticulously dabbed the thick beige liquid over the blackened skin, blending it with a damp sponge. It wasn't perfect, but it dulled the angry purple into a yellowish shadow that could be mistaken for bad lighting. To be safe, she selected a high-necked, charcoal-grey silk blouse, a rare splurge she had bought on sale at Nordstrom, and buttoned it to her clavicle. An hour later, Penelope was on the rattling F train, clutching her worn leather tote bag to her chest like a shield. Her destination was the towering glass and steel monolith in the financial district that housed Alden Enterprises. On paper, it was a wildly successful logistics and international shipping conglomerate. In reality, it was the immaculate, legitimate front for one of the most powerful and feared crime syndicates on the eastern seaboard. Penelope didn't know the full extent of the blood that paved the foundation of the building, but she wasn't naive. She noticed the men in tailored Italian suits with bulges under their left arms. She saw the way visiting CEOs sweated profusely when ushered into the top-floor office. Most importantly, she knew her boss, Cassian Alden, was not a man bound by the laws of ordinary society. Arriving at the penthouse floor, Penelope stepped out of the private elevator, her low heels sinking into the plush, navy blue carpet. The office was a masterpiece of modern minimalism, heavily accented with dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. "Good morning, Penny," greeted Leo, the broad-shouldered security chief who sat at the front desk. Despite his intimidating scar and the Glock 19 resting openly on his desk, Leo had always treated her with a gruff sort of kindness. "Good morning, Leo," Penelope replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept her chin tucked, hyper-aware of the collar of her blouse. "Boss is already in," Leo added, nodding toward the heavy double doors at the end of the hall. "He's in a mood. The shipment from Palermo got held up at customs." Penelope nodded, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She hurried to her desk, a sleek glass workstation situated just outside Cassian's office. She quickly booted up her computer, organized the morning briefs, and prepared a cup of espresso. Black, 2 shots, exactly the way Cassian took it. Taking a deep breath, she balanced the saucer on a tray and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Cassian Alden stood by the window, a phone pressed to his ear. He was a striking man in his early 30s, standing at 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his bespoke Brioni suit to perfection. His hair was pitch black, neatly swept back, and his jawline looked as though it had been chiseled from marble. But it was his eyes that terrified people, a pale, icy grey that seemed to strip away lies and polite fictions, seeing straight into the marrow of a person's bones. "I don't care what the port authority says," Cassian spoke into the phone, his voice a low, lethal baritone that sent a shiver down Penelope's spine. "Tell them if the containers aren't released by midnight, I will personally ensure the commissioner's gambling debts in Atlantic City become public knowledge. Do we understand each other?" Penelope kept her eyes glued to the floor, moving silently across the expansive room. She placed the espresso on his desk, aligning the handle of the cup perfectly with the edge of his leather desk pad. She turned to leave, hoping to slip out unnoticed. "Penelope." His voice cracked like a whip in the silent room. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Yes, Mr. Alden," she answered, turning slowly. Cassian ended his call without saying goodbye, tossing the phone onto the desk. He turned to face her, those icy grey eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, the air in the room felt impossibly heavy. Penelope felt a flush rising to her cheeks. She was acutely aware of her body under his gaze, of the curves she hated, of the softness that Butch despised. But Cassian didn't look at her with disgust. His gaze was analytical, intensely focused, and uncomfortably thorough. "You're late," he stated. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an observation. Penelope was never late. In 3 years of working for him, she had a flawless record of arriving exactly 15 minutes early. The train was delayed, sir. Signal problems at Queen's Plaza," she lied, her voice trembling slightly. The truth was that she had spent 20 extra minutes icing her neck to bring down the swelling. Cassian took a step toward her. The scent of his Tom Ford Oud Wood cologne washed over her, a rich masculine scent that was a jarring contrast to the stale odors of her apartment. "Is that so?" he murmured, stopping just 3 feet away from her. He tilted his head. "You look pale. Are you ill?" "No, sir. I'm perfectly fine." She instinctively reached up, her fingers grazing the high collar of her blouse, making sure it hadn't slipped. Cassian's eyes tracked the movement. A micro-expression flickered across his stoic features, a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of his eyes. He missed nothing. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she favored her left side, and the excessive layer of makeup caked around her jawline. "See that you stay that way," Cassian said quietly, his tone suddenly softer, though no less intense. "I need you at your best, Penelope. We have the merger with the Rossi family to finalize this week. I cannot have my right hand faltering." "I won't falter, Mr. Alden," she promised, backing away toward the door. "Leave the door open," he commanded as she reached the exit. "And cancel my 11 o'clock. I have alternative business to attend to." As Penelope scurried back to her desk, she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She thought she had survived the encounter. She didn't realize that Cassian Alden had already seen through her pathetic disguise, and that the wheels of his dangerous mind were already turning. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of ringing phones, endless spreadsheets, and frantic emails. Penelope threw herself into the work, using the relentless pace of the Mafia-fronted corporation to drown out the throbbing ache in her neck. Every time she swallowed, a sharp pain radiated down her throat, a stark reminder of Butch's fingers. Around 1 p.m., Cassian summoned her into his office again to take dictation for a series of highly confidential contracts. Penelope grabbed her iPad and stylus, hurrying into the lion's den. Cassian was seated behind his massive desk, sifting through a stack of thick, cream-colored files. "Sit," he ordered, not looking up. Penelope took her usual seat in one of the plush leather wingback chairs opposite him. She crossed her ankles, tucking her legs beneath the chair, trying to make herself as small as possible. She kept her posture rigid, her chin tucked down. For 20 minutes, Cassian dictated complex legal jargon, his mind operating with terrifying brilliance. Penelope's fingers flew across the screen, capturing every word. Despite her lack of formal legal training, Cassian had come to rely on her heavily. She was smart, efficient, and, most importantly, to a man in his position, she knew how to keep her mouth shut. Section 4, Clause B, Cassian continued, leaning back in his chair, his eyes dropping to the files on his desk. Stipulate that any interference in the supply chain operating out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard will result in an immediate liquidation of assets belonging to the offending party. Emphasize immediate. Immediate liquidation, Penelope repeated softly, writing it down. "Hand me the Rossi file," Cassian said, pointing to a red folder on the corner of his desk. Penelope leaned forward to grab the file. As she extended her arm, the slick silk of her blouse shifted. The high collar, which she had so carefully adjusted, slipped down an inch. At the same moment, she let out a small, involuntary gasp as the movement pulled fiercely at the bruised muscles in her neck. Cassian's head snapped up. His eyes didn't meet hers. They locked onto the exposed skin at the base of her throat. The silence in the room became deafening. The ambient hum of the city outside seemed to fade into nothingness. Penelope froze, the red folder clutched in her trembling hand. She saw Cassian's gaze, saw the exact moment his pupils dilated, transforming his icy grey eyes into endless, dark voids. "Mr. Alden," she whispered, terrified by the sudden stillness of the man before her. Cassian slowly stood up. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, bypassing his desk and walking deliberately toward her. Penelope's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted to shrink back, to run, but she was paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming aura of danger radiating from him. He stopped directly in front of her chair. For a long, agonizing moment, he just looked down at her. "Look at me, Penelope," he commanded. The voice was devoid of its usual sharp, corporate edge. It was a rough, guttural sound, steeped in violence. Trembling, Penelope lifted her chin. The movement caused the collar to shift further, fully exposing the ugly, yellow-purple edge of the bruise that the concealer could no longer hide. Cassian raised his hand. Penelope flinched violently, her eyes squeezing shut as she braced for a blow, a deeply ingrained reflex from living with Butch. A sharp intake of breath hissed through Cassian's teeth. When Penelope cautiously opened her eyes, Cassian's hand was hovering inches from her face, his fingers curled into a tight, trembling fist. He looked at her flinch, and something dark and terrifying cracked open behind his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he uncurled his fingers. He didn't touch the bruise. He wouldn't risk hurting her further. Instead, his large, calloused hand gently cupped the side of her face that was uninjured. His thumb brushed softly against her cheekbone, a touch so tender it felt completely alien to her. "Who did this to you?" The question was quiet, but it held the weight of a death sentence. I fell," Penelope stammered, the pathetic lie tumbling from her lips on instinct. "I tripped over a rug in my apartment. I'm clumsy, you know that, sir." Cassian's thumb stopped moving. He stared into her wide, panicked hazel eyes. He knew she was lying. He had spent his entire life in the criminal underworld. He knew what violence looked like. He knew the difference between a bruise from a fall and the distinct, finger-shaped contusions of a man trying to choke the life out of a woman. "A rug," Cassian repeated, his voice dangerously flat. "Yes," Penelope whispered, desperate to convince him. "It's nothing. Really. Just a stupid accident." Cassian stared at her for a moment longer. He noticed the way her heavy, beautiful breasts rose and fell with her panicked breathing. He noticed the soft curves of her waist, the fullness of her figure that he had always secretly admired. He had kept his distance for 3 years because she was innocent, untouched by the darkness of his world. He had convinced himself that keeping her strictly professional was the best way to protect her. He had been wrong. The danger wasn't his world. It was hers. Cassian dropped his hand, taking a step back. The tender expression vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, calculating fury. "I see," Cassian said. He turned his back on her, walking to the window. "Leave the file on the desk. You are dismissed for the afternoon." "But, sir, the Rossi contracts—" "I said you are dismissed, Penelope," Cassian interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Go home. Rest. Do not come in tomorrow. That is a direct order." Penelope stood up on shaky legs, placing the red file on the glass desk. She didn't understand what had just happened, but the abrupt dismissal stung. She thought she had disgusted him. She thought her clumsiness, her fatness, her pathetic inability to hide her messy life had finally driven him to fire her. "Yes, Mr. Alden," she whispered, fighting back tears. She practically fled the office, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind her. As soon as she was gone, Cassian picked up his desk phone and hit a single speed dial button. "Matteo," Cassian said, his voice cold enough to freeze liquid nitrogen. "Get in my office, now!" Less than a minute later, Matteo Russo, Cassian's underboss and oldest friend, walked through the doors. Matteo was a charming sociopath with a penchant for designer suits and wet work. He took one look at Cassian's face and immediately dropped his casual demeanor. "Who do we need to kill?" Matteo asked plainly. "Penelope," Cassian began, his hands resting flat on the desk, his knuckles white from the pressure. "Find out who she's living with. Find out who she's dating. I want his name, his occupation, his daily routine, and a list of every breath he's taken in the last 5 years. I want to know what time he wakes up, and what kind of beer he drinks." Matteo's eyebrows shot up. "The secretary? Penny? Boss, what happened?" "Someone put their hands on her neck, Matteo," Cassian whispered, the raw, unfiltered violence in his voice making even the hardened underboss stiffen. "Someone choked her." Matteo's expression darkened. "Give me 2 hours. I want the dossier by 4 o'clock, Cassian ordered, turning back to the window, looking out over the sprawling city. "And Matteo, tell the boys down in the garage to prep the soundproof room. We're going to have a guest very soon." The apartment in Queens felt smaller than usual when Penelope unlocked the door at 3 in the afternoon. She was terrified. Cassian had never sent her home early before. She was convinced she was going to be fired, which meant she would lose her income, which meant Butch would be furious. She quietly closed the door, taking off her coat. The apartment was a mess. Empty beer cans littered to the cheap coffee table, and a half-eaten pizza box sat open on the counter. Butch was sitting on the sagging faux leather sofa, a video game controller in his hands, wearing a stained white tank top that strained against his own burgeoning beer belly. He didn't work. He hadn't held a steady job in 2 years, claiming he was waiting for the right management opportunity while blowing Penelope's hard-earned salary on DraftKings and cheap liquor. "What are you doing home?" Butch snapped, not taking his eyes off the television screen as virtual gunfire echoed through the room. "Mr. Alden, he told me to take the afternoon off," Penelope said softly, keeping her distance, lingering near the kitchenette. Butch paused the game, turning to glare at her. His eyes were bloodshot. "Did you get fired, you stupid cow? Because if you lost that paycheck, you're sleeping on the street tonight." "No, Brad, I didn't get fired," she said quickly, her heart rate accelerating. He said I looked tired. He gave me tomorrow off, too. Paid." Butch scoffed, tossing the controller onto the cushion. He stood up, towering over her. Penelope instinctively took a step back until her spine hit the edge of the kitchen counter. "Look at you," Butch sneered, walking slowly toward her. "Fat, ugly, and now you're slacking off at work. You think some rich Wall Street prick like Alden wants to look at your ugly face every day? You're lucky he keeps you around to fetch his coffee." He reached out, his thick fingers grabbing a handful of her dark curls, giving it a sharp, painful yank. Penelope whimpered, but didn't fight back. Fighting back always made it worse. "Go to the ATM down the street," Butch ordered, letting go of her hair and giving her shoulder a hard shove. "I need $300. I got a tip on a horse at Belmont." "Brad, I can't. Rent is due on Friday. We don't have enough if you take 300. "Don't tell me what we have!" Butch roared, slamming his fist onto the countertop, an inch from her hand. Penelope flinched, closing her eyes. "Go get the money, Penelope, before I give you a matching bruise on the other side of your fat neck." Tears spilled over her lashes. She nodded frantically. Okay, I'll go." Grabbing her purse, she practically ran out the door, gasping for air as soon as she hit the hallway. She felt entirely trapped. She was drowning in a sea of debt, fear, and shattered self-esteem, completely unaware that a mile away, a storm of unimaginable violence was brewing in her name. At exactly 3:45 p.m., Matteo walked back into Cassian's office, dropping a thick manila folder onto the glass desk. "His name is Butch Kennedy," Matteo said, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. 32 years old, unemployed, 2 previous arrests for aggravated assault, both dropped because the victims refused to testify. He has a massive gambling addiction, owes about 40 grand to a bookie out in Bay Ridge. Cassian opened the folder. The first page was a surveillance photo of Butch, taken just 30 minutes ago, as he stood on the balcony of Penelope's apartment, smoking a cigarette. Cassian stared at the man's face, memorizing his features. It was a face he was going to dismantle, piece by piece. "Does she pay for everything?" Cassian asked, his eyes scanning the financial documents Matteo had illegally acquired. "Every dime," Matteo confirmed, taking a sip of scotch. "Her bank accounts are drained every week. Cash withdrawals, mostly going straight to casinos or bookies. The guy is a parasite, Cassian. He's bleeding her dry and beating her when she doesn't bleed fast enough." Cassian closed the folder gently. The quietness of his movements was far more terrifying than if he had flipped the desk. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city he owned. He could have Mateo drive out to Queens right now, put a bullet in Butch Kennedy's head, and bury him under the new stadium concrete in the Bronx. It would take less than an hour, but a quick death was too good for a man who put his hands on Penelope. Cassian wanted Butch to suffer. He wanted Butch to know exactly who was destroying him, and why. Furthermore, Cassian knew Penelope's psychology. If Butch just disappeared, she would blame herself. She was conditioned to feel guilt. Cassian needed to break Butch in front of her, to show her exactly how small and pathetic her abuser truly was. "Mateo," Cassian said, turning back to his underboss. "Call the bookie in Bay Ridge. Buy Kennedy's debt. Pay double if you have to. As of 5 o'clock today, Butch Kennedy owes his 40 grand to me." Mateo grinned, a wolfish, dangerous expression. "Done." "And then?" "Then we orchestrate an intervention," Cassian said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. "I am hosting a private dinner tomorrow night at Le Bernardin to discuss the Rossi merger. Call Penelope. Tell her it is mandatory that she attends to take minutes. Tell her she will be compensated a bonus of $5,000 for her time." Mateo frowned in confusion. "You're bringing her to a mob sit-down?" "It's not a sit-down. Rossi won't be there. Only Penelope and I will be there," Cassian corrected, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "And when her greedy pig of a boyfriend sees a $5,000 deposit hit her account, he will demand to know where she's going. He will follow her. And when he shows up to Le Bernardin, to cause a scene and drag her out." Cassian didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavily in the air. "I'll have the crew on standby outside the restaurant," Mateo said, nodding in approval. "No," Cassian said softly. "I will handle Mr. Kennedy myself. Just make sure the back alley behind the kitchen is cleared of any security cameras." That evening, Penelope was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, pressing a cold washcloth to her swollen eyes when her phone buzzed. It was an email from Matteo Russo, marked urgent. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Penelope, boss requires your presence at a private business dinner tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Le Bernardin, Midtown. Mandatory attendance for contract dictation. A $5,000 bonus has been authorized for your overtime and transferred to your account. Dress code is formal. Do not be late." Penelope stared at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. $5,000? That was enough to pay off Butch's immediate debts. It was enough to keep him happy for a month. But a private dinner with Cassian Alden? The thought filled her with a mixture of intense anxiety and a strange, fluttering warmth in her chest. She didn't know that by accepting the invitation, she was walking straight into the epicenter of a Mafia vendetta. She only knew she had to find something formal to wear that would cover her bruises. The notification pinged on Penelope's cracked iPhone screen at exactly 9 a.m. on Wednesday. A direct deposit of $5,000 from Alden Enterprises. She stared at the glowing numbers, her breath catching in her throat. It was more money than she had ever seen at one time. For a fleeting second, she imagined taking the cash, packing a single suitcase, and vanishing on a Greyhound bus to somewhere Butch could never find her. But reality crashed down quickly. Butch had the password to her banking app. He tracked her finances with obsessive, tyrannical control. "What are you staring at?" Butch shuffled into the kitchen, scratching his protruding belly, a half-empty bottle of stale beer dangling from his fingers. His bloodshot eyes zeroed in on her phone. Before Penelope could lock the screen, he snatched the device from her hand. His eyes widened as he processed the bank balance. $5,000, Butch breathed, his lips curling into a greedy, yellowed smile. Your boss actually paid out a bonus? I'll be damned. The stupid cow finally did something right. I need that for rent, Brad, Penelope pleaded, stepping forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. And the electric bill is 2 months past due. They're going to shut off the power. Shut up, Butch snapped, shoving her back by her shoulder. Penelope stumbled, her hip colliding painfully with the counter. I handle the finances. You're too stupid to manage this kind of cash. Besides, I have a sure thing at the track today. I'll double it by midnight. He pocketed her phone. Where is this fancy dinner tonight, anyway? Le Bernardin, she whispered, rubbing her hip. In Midtown. It's a very strict dress code. I have to go to a boutique in Manhattan. I need a dress. Butch looked her up and down, his gaze dripping with unfiltered disgust. He took in her wide hips, her thick thighs, the softness of her stomach. Good luck finding a tent that fits you. Take 200 from the emergency jar, and don't you dare look like a cheap tramp in front of this Wall Street prick. I want him thinking you're worth keeping around so the bonuses keep rolling in. He turned and walked back to the living room, completely oblivious to the fact that his own greed was leading him to the slaughterhouse. By 6 o'clock, Penelope stood in the dressing room of a high-end plus-size boutique in Soho. She had spent significantly more than $200. She had used a hidden credit card Butch didn't know about. She stared at the woman in the mirror, barely recognizing herself. She wore a long-sleeved, emerald green velvet wrap dress. The heavy, luxurious fabric draped flawlessly over her curves, cinching tightly at her waist before flowing over her wide hips. The deep V-neck would normally expose her collarbones, but she had brilliantly paired it with a sheer, black silk mock-neck undershirt. It added an air of sophisticated modesty, while completely concealing the ugly, yellowish-purple bruises on her neck. Her wild, dark curls were pinned back on one side with a glittering comb, cascading down her opposite shoulder. For the first time in years, Penelope didn't feel fat and useless. She felt beautiful. She felt like a woman who belonged in the orbit of a man like Cassian Alden. When Penelope stepped out of the yellow cab in front of Le Bernardin at 10 minutes to 8, her nerves threatened to suffocate her. The restaurant was the pinnacle of New York exclusivity, a temple of haute cuisine with softly glowing sconces and hushed, reverent atmospheres. Name, madame? The impeccably dressed maitre d' asked as she stepped into the foyer. Penelope Davies. I believe I'm with the Rossi party. Under Alden. The maitre d's polite smile shifted into an expression of profound deference. Ah, Miss Davies. Of course. Mr. Alden is expecting you in the private salon. Please follow me. Penelope clutched her leather portfolio tightly to her chest, following the host past the crowded main dining room, down a discreet mahogany-paneled hallway. The host opened a set of double frosted glass doors, stepping aside to let her enter. The private dining room was breathtaking, illuminated by dozens of flickering pillar candles that cast dancing shadows against the dark wood walls. The table was set for only 2 people. Standing by a private bar in the corner was Cassian. He wore a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit, the jacket unbuttoned to reveal a platinum pocket watch chain draped across his vest. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, swirling it slowly. When he turned and saw Penelope, the movement of his wrist stopped dead. His piercing grey eyes dragged over her slowly. He took in the emerald velvet, the way the dress hugged the generous, soft curves of her hips, the fullness of her breasts, the elegant sweep of her hair. Butch looked at her body as a flaw to be hidden. Cassian looked at her as if she were a masterpiece he had just discovered in a forgotten vault. "Mr. Alden," Penelope stammered, instantly feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. She looked around the empty, cavernous room. I thought the Rossi family was joining us. Should I set up the recording equipment?" Cassian set his glass down on the bar. He closed the distance between them with slow, measured steps. The sheer magnetic pull of his presence made Penelope's breath hitch. "There is no Rossi meeting tonight, Penelope," he said softly, his deep voice vibrating in the quiet room. "I don't understand," she said, her grip on her portfolio tightening. "The bonus, the emails. I needed you out of that apartment," Cassian stated simply. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently wrapping around the portfolio in her arms and pulling it away from her. He tossed it carelessly onto a nearby credenza. "And I needed to see you outside of the confines of my office. You look absolutely breathtaking, Penny." Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He called her Penny. In 3 years, he had never used her nickname. It felt terrifyingly intimate. "Sir, Cassian," he corrected, pulling out the plush chair at the table. "Tonight, I am just Cassian. Sit. You haven't eaten properly in weeks. I can see it in your face." Overwhelmed and entirely out of her depth, Penelope allowed him to guide her into the chair. The dinner that followed was a blur of exquisite flavors: buttery lobster truffles, seared Wagyu beef, and wines that tasted like liquid gold. But none of it compared to the intensity of the man sitting across from her. Cassian didn't push her to confess. He didn't ask about the bruises. Instead, he asked about her life. He asked about the literature degree she had abandoned to take a secretarial job. He listened with absolute, unwavering focus, treating her words as though they were state secrets. For 2 hours, Penelope forgot about the unpaid bills, the crumbling apartment in Queens, and the monster waiting for her at home. She felt seen. As the dessert plates were cleared, Cassian leaned forward, his elbows resting on the pristine white tablecloth. The warm candlelight caught the hard, ruthless angles of his jaw. "I know what happens in that apartment, Penelope," Cassian said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping from gentle suitor into the lethal Mafia don who ruled the city's shadows. Penelope froze, her dessert spoon clattering against the china. The illusion of the evening shattered. The terror rushed back, suffocating her. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. "Do not lie to me." "Not tonight," Cassian commanded gently. "His name is Butch Kennedy. He is a parasite, a violent, worthless degenerate who thinks he can put his hands on what belongs to me." Penelope's breath caught. "What belongs to me?" "You can't get involved, Cassian," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes, terrified of what Butch would do if he found out she had told her boss. "He's unpredictable. He's dangerous." Cassian let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a shiver down her spine. "My sweet Penny, you have absolutely no idea what dangerous looks like." He stood up, extending his hand to her. "Come, it's time to go." The night air was biting and cold as they exited through the restaurant's private rear door, leading into a secluded, dimly lit cobblestone alleyway. Cassian had arranged for his private driver to meet them there to avoid the paparazzi at the front entrance. The sleek, bulletproof black Maybach was idling at the end of the alley. Cassian kept his hand firmly on the small of Penelope's back, guiding her over the uneven stones. Her mind was spinning. Cassian knew everything. He knew about Butch. He knew about the abuse. But what did he plan to do? Well. Look at this. The slurred, ugly voice echoed through the narrow alley, bouncing off the brick walls. Penelope's blood ran cold. She stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Stepping out from the shadows of a nearby dumpster was Butch. He was staggering slightly, reeking of cheap bourbon and stale sweat. He wore a stained denim jacket, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He had followed her. He had tracked her phone's location after draining the rest of the money she had left in the jar. "Brad?" Penelope gasped, sheer panic seizing her chest. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see where my money was going," Butch sneered, taking a stumbling step toward them. His gaze locked onto Cassian, looking him up and down with drunken bravado. "So this is the rich prick you've been spreading your legs for. No wonder you brought home $5,000. Does he pay by the pound, you fat?" Butch didn't get to finish the sentence. Cassian moved with a terrifying, explosive speed that didn't match his tailored, elegant appearance. In a fraction of a second, Cassian closed the distance. His right hand shot out, wrapping around Butch's throat with the force of an industrial vice. The heavy thud of Butch's back slamming against the brick wall echoed sharply. Penelope let out a muffled scream, stepping back. Cassian lifted Butch an inch off the ground by his neck alone. The drunken bravado evaporated from Butch's eyes instantly, replaced by stark, choking terror. He clawed frantically at Cassian's wrist, but it was like trying to pry off a steel band. "Speak another word to her, and I will tear your vocal cords out through your teeth," Cassian whispered. His voice wasn't loud. It was a cold, dead hiss, devoid of any human empathy. Two massive figures materialized from the shadows at the end of the alley. Matteo Russo, wearing a tailored navy suit and a chilling smile, casually blocked the exit, his hand resting on the suppressed pistol holstered inside his jacket. Next to him was Leo, the front desk security chief, rolling his shoulders. The perimeter was entirely locked down. There were no cameras, no witnesses. Cassian dropped Butch. The larger man crumpled to the cobblestones, gasping for air, hacking and coughing violently. Who the hell are you?" Butch wheezed, crawling backward, his back scraping against the rough brick. Cassian adjusted the cuffs of his suit perfectly, looking down at Butch as one might look at dog excrement scraped off a shoe. "I am the man who owns your life," Cassian stated smoothly. He reached into his breast pocket, retrieving a folded piece of heavy parchment. He let it drop onto Butch's chest. $40,000, payable to Marco in Bay Ridge. Marco works for Matteo. Matteo works for me. As of 5 o'clock yesterday, I bought your marker." Butch's eyes bulged as he scrambled to grab the paper, recognizing the bookie's signature. The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't dealing with a Wall Street CEO. He was looking at Cassian Alden, the head of the most ruthless crime family in the state. I can get the money," Butch stammered, urine beginning to soak the front of his jeans in sheer terror. "I swear to God, Mr. Alden, just give me a month. I'll pay double." "I don't want your money," Cassian replied, stepping closer, his expensive leather Oxford shoe pinning Butch's right hand flat against the cobblestone. "I want to explain the rules of consequence to you." Cassian looked over his shoulder at Penelope, who was shaking violently, clutching the lapels of her velvet dress. She was terrified, yes, but deep down, buried beneath years of trauma and fear, a dark, primal spark of vindication ignited in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Cassian turned his attention back to the pathetic man cowering on the ground. "You put your hands on her," Cassian said, his voice dropping into a lethal, rhythmic cadence. "You used this hand to bruise her neck." Cassian shifted his weight, grinding his heel down onto Butch's knuckles. Butch let out a blood-curdling shriek, trying desperately to yank his hand away, but Cassian's weight was immovable. "You used this hand," Cassian continued, entirely unaffected by the screaming, "to take her money, to push her down, to make her feel small." Crack! The sickening sound of shattering bone echoed through the alley. Butch's scream morphed into a wet, gurgling sob as Cassian shattered every metacarpal in his right hand with one brutal stomp of his heel. Cassian stepped back, stepping delicately over the sobbing, convulsing man on the ground. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a microscopic speck of dirt from his shoe. "Matteo," Cassian called out softly, without turning his head. "Boss," Matteo replied, stepping forward with eerie calm. "Take Mr. Kennedy to the warehouse in Red Hook. Strip him. Chain him to the floor. If he passes out from the pain, wake him up. We will finish the conversation regarding his debt tomorrow morning." "With pleasure," Matteo smiled, motioning for Leo to grab Butch by his collar. They dragged him away like a sack of garbage, his broken hand leaving a smeared trail of blood on the stones. Cassian turned back to Penelope. The monstrous violence he had just inflicted vanished from his face, replaced by a quiet, protective intensity. He walked over to her, reaching out slowly so she could see his hands. She didn't flinch. He gently traced the line of her jawline with his thumb, right above the hidden bruises. "He will never touch you again," Cassian swore, his voice fierce and absolute. "He will never speak your name. You are entirely safe, Penny. Do you understand me?" Penelope looked up into his icy grey eyes, tears spilling over her lashes, ruining her makeup. She wasn't just safe. She was claimed. "I understand," she whispered. Cassian wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest, and guided her toward the waiting Maybach. The shadows of the city seemed to part for them, bowing to the man who ruled them, and the woman he had just crowned as his queen. Sunlight, warm and unobstructed, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue penthouse, waking Penelope from the first genuinely restful sleep she had experienced in years. She blinked against the brightness, her senses slowly registering her surroundings. She was not on her lumpy, spring-shot mattress in Queens. She was enveloped in genuine silk sheets and heavy, thousand-thread-count fret linens, lying in a bed large enough to sleep four comfortably. The air smelled faintly of oud wood and expensive espresso, the unmistakable scent of Cassian Alden. Panic briefly seized her chest as the memories of the previous night came rushing back. The dinner at Le Bernardin, the cobblestone alleyway, the sickening sound of Butch's bones shattering beneath Cassian's heel. She sat up abruptly, clutching the duvet to her chest, her breathing shallow. She was wearing one of Cassian's oversized white button-down shirts, the crisp cotton swallowing her frame, yet doing little to hide the generous swell of her hips and the softness of her stomach. The heavy mahogany door clicked open, and Cassian walked in, carrying a silver tray. He had traded his tailored three-piece suit for a simple pair of dark slacks and a charcoal Henley that clung to his muscular chest. The ruthless Mafia boss, who had nearly killed a man with his bare hands 12 hours ago, was now carefully balancing a porcelain cup of espresso and a plate of fresh pastries from Balthazar. "You're awake," Cassian said softly, his icy grey eyes immediately softening as they landed on her. He set the tray on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the mattress. "Cassian, Penelope hesitated, her hands instinctively moving to pull the duvet higher, trying to hide her double chin, her thick arms, the physical reality of her body that Butch had spent years convincing her was repulsive. "I shouldn't be here. I'm taking up your space. I'm a mess." Cassian's jaw tightened. He reached out, his large hands gently but firmly gripping her wrists, pulling the duvet down. He didn't let her hide. "Stop," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "Stop looking at yourself through the eyes of a dead man, Penelope." Tears pricked her eyes. "He isn't dead." "He might as well be," Cassian replied coldly. Then his expression shifted to one of profound reverence. He moved closer, his hand sliding up her arms to cup her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks. "Do you have any idea how beautiful you are? How much I have wanted you since the first day you walked into my office in those terrible oversized sweaters?" "I'm fat, Cassian," she blurted out, the ugly, terrifying truth leaving her lips as a sob. "I'm fat and clumsy, and I don't fit in your world. Your world is full of supermodels and perfection. I am just me." Cassian's eyes darkened with a possessive, consuming fire. He leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from hers. "You are exactly what I want. Your softness, your curves, your brilliant mind. You are perfect." Butch Kennedy was a pathetic, insecure insect who had to break you down to feel like a man. "I am a king, Penny, and a king knows a queen when he sees one." He kissed her, wiping away the remnants of her fear. It wasn't a tentative, careful kiss. It was deep, claiming, and desperate, tasting of coffee and absolute devotion. Penelope melted into him, her hands tangling in his dark hair, allowing herself to feel desired for the very first time in her life. Cassian pulled back slowly, pressing a kiss to her jawline, deliberately kissing the skin right next to the fading yellow bruise, reclaiming the territory as his own. The tender moment was violently shattered by the harsh buzzing of the intercom on the bedside table. Cassian sighed, a lethal annoyance flashing in his eyes. He pressed the button. "This had better be life or death, Matteo." Matteo's voice crackled through the speaker, devoid of its usual arrogant drawl. He sounded genuinely stressed. "Boss, we have a massive problem. I've been working Kennedy over at the Red Hook warehouse all night. The rat started singing to save his other hand." "And?" Cassian demanded. "Marco wasn't his only bookie," Matteo revealed, the tension bleeding through the electronic speaker. "Kennedy owed 80 grand to Declan O'Connor and the Irish crew in Hell's Kitchen. The Irish were going to kill him yesterday morning. To buy himself time, Kennedy gave them something else. He gave them Penelope's master security badge and her administrative login credentials to the corporate mainframe." Penelope gasped, her blood running instantly cold. Because she managed Cassian's most sensitive schedules and logistical meetings, her credentials had Level 5 clearance. It was the highest access code outside of Cassian's own. "When did he give them the badge?" Cassian barked, standing up instantly, his entire demeanor shifting into absolute warfare. "Yesterday morning while she was sleeping," Matteo said. "Boss, O'Connor's men are at the financial district building right now. Leo just reported a breach in the sub-basement. They are trying to access the primary server room to drain the offshore accounts and steal the shipping manifests for the Palermo cargo." "Lock the building down. I'm on my way," Cassian ordered, killing the intercom. He turned to his closet, pulling out a shoulder holster and checking the magazine of his Sig Sauer P226. "Cassian, it's my fault," Penelope cried, scrambling out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. He stole my badge from my purse. He watched me type in my passwords when I worked from home. I've compromised everything. It is not your fault, Cassian said sharply, shrugging on a black suit jacket over his holster. Stay here. The penthouse is secure. I will handle O'Connor, and then I am going to put a bullet between Butch Kennedy's eyes myself. No, wait! Penelope shouted, a sudden spark of adrenaline overpowering her terror. She ran to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the bedroom, flipping open Cassian's encrypted MacBook Pro. You can't get downtown in time. If O'Connor's men are already in the sub-basement, they will breach the server firewalls in less than 3 minutes. Penny, step away from the computer, Cassian warned, heading for the door. This is syndicate business now. It's violent. I am your secretary, Cassian, she fired back, her hands flying over the keyboard with lightning speed. I organized those servers. I set up the proxy redundancies for the offshore accounts. They have my passwords, but they don't know my keystroke habits. Cassian stopped with his hand on the brass doorknob, watching in stunned silence as the quiet, timid woman he had sworn to protect transformed into a formidable tactical asset right before his eyes. Penelope stared at the glowing screen, her hazel eyes reflecting the scrolling lines of code. Her fingers moved with a furious, desperate rhythm. She bypassed the standard corporate login, navigating straight into the dark web architecture that Alden Enterprises used to mask its illicit financial movements. They're in the system, Penelope announced, her voice surprisingly steady. I can see their terminal pinging from the sub-basement server rack. They are trying to initiate a mass wire transfer to a shell company in Dublin. Cassian walked slowly back to the desk, standing behind her, his large hands resting firmly on her shoulders. Can you stop it? I'm not just going to stop it, Penelope said, a fierce, protective fire burning in her chest. These men were trying to destroy the man who had just saved her life. She wouldn't let them. I'm going to trap them. She quickly opened a backdoor script she had written months ago, just to make her daily filing more efficient, a script nobody else knew existed. She rerouted the massive wire transfer, looping the outgoing funds back into a heavily encrypted dummy account that she locked with a biometric failsafe. The money is secured, Penelope breathed, hitting the enter key. Now for O'Connor's crew. She accessed the building's physical security mainframe. Because the system read her login as the active administrator, it didn't block her commands. She pulled up the blueprints of the sub-basement. Leo is on the ground floor with 5 men, Cassian said, pointing to the screen. O'Connor's crew is in room 4B, the server vault. Not for long, Penelope murmured. She typed in a rapid sequence of override commands. Initiating emergency lockdown on sub-basement sector 4. Overriding pneumatic doors. Cutting ventilation to 30% to induce fatigue. And dropping the magnetic blast doors. On the screen, a series of green indicators flashed to red. Deep beneath the bustling streets of Manhattan, 4 heavily armed Irish mobsters were suddenly plunged into total darkness as the foot-thick steel vault doors slammed shut, locking them inside a soundproof, impenetrable metal box. Penelope sat back in the leather desk chair, her chest heaving, her hands shaking as the adrenaline began to crash. They're trapped. Room 4B is hermetically sealed. They can't get out, and they can't access the terminal. Cassian stared at the screen, and then slowly looked down at the woman sitting in his chair. He had expected to save a damsel in distress. He had expected to coddle her, to hide her away in luxury, while he fought the monsters in the dark. Instead, she had just single-handedly thwarted a multi-million-dollar cyber heist and neutralized a heavily armed hit squad in less than 4 minutes, wearing nothing but his dress shirt. Cassian leaned down, spinning her chair around so she was facing him. He grabbed her face, kissing her with a bruising, overwhelming intensity. It was a kiss of triumph, of awe, of total surrender. "Remind me to triple your salary," Cassian whispered against her lips, a dark, dangerous smile spreading across his handsome face. He pulled out his phone, dialing Leo. "Leo, Sector 4 vault is locked down. Our Irish friends are trapped inside. Take a blowtorch, open the door, and send them back to Declan O'Connor in very small pieces. Oh, and tell Matteo to finish Kennedy. We are officially done playing games." 6 months later, the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was overflowing with the most powerful figures of the eastern seaboard. Mayors, senators, and rival mob bosses clinked crystal glasses of Dom Perignon, celebrating the historic, unbreakable alliance between the Alden and Rossi families. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, surveying the empire she now co-ruled, was Penelope. She was no longer hiding in oversized grey sweaters. She wore a custom, breathtaking gown of deep crimson silk that hugged her generous curves perfectly, featuring a sweetheart neckline that proudly displayed her unblemished skin and a terrifyingly expensive Cartier diamond necklace. Her dark curls were swept into an elegant updo, framing a face that radiated confidence, intelligence, and lethal grace. Cassian walked up behind her, sliding his arm around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her soft stomach. He kissed the curve of her neck, right where the ugly yellow bruise used to be. "They are terrified of you," Cassian murmured in her ear, looking down at the crowd of hardened criminals who actively avoided making eye contact with the boss's wife. "They should be." Penelope smiled, leaning back into his solid chest. She had learned how to wield her brilliant mind like a scalpel, controlling the financial arteries of the entire syndicate. She wasn't just the shy secretary anymore. She was the velvet armor protecting the ruthless king. And anyone who dared to forget that would quickly learn exactly how devastating a queen's vengeance could be. Thank you so much for joining us on this